fresh off of an exciting Super Bowl, our second one of the day. I mean, who else is doing back-to-back post-Super Bowl? Theo, and we got our boy Josh Larky. You know him from the 33rd team. He's back in the district for his, man, at this point, he's an honorary GOAT. Let's get to it.
Appearances at this point.
I tried to look up. I couldn't find the official number, man. We'll have to go to the
6.
You might be over 6 at this point, Josh.
I think you're over 6. Yeah, we'll get that verified before we get back. Let's get to it, guys.
Go district. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, ball, and I bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. It's the Go district, y'all. I ball, cause I bleed, hey. Bleeding, I ball, defeated the odds, didn't see him at all. JD in the pods, I needed it all. I bleeded a lie, you bleeded a lie, not bleeded a lie. And that's what a GOAT do. Facts, let me show you. Happen to know dudes drafting, they don't do bad and they don't lose. Make you wanna bleed. It's the Go district, boys giving you the business and no gimmicks. The best ball drafts got me feeling like it's Christmas. Then it's Christmas all of a sudden, and these riches came from nothing. And I got this all from loving the district. See, I just drafted, forget it. I laugh at the critics, they mad at the digits. I clap back by listening. See, ballin' ain't a problem if you kick it with them off. And I refresh the feed till autumn, then I bleed, go.
What is up, Fantasyland? We're back for another BALLiN. Like I said, we got Josh Larky from the 33rd team. We're going to dive deep into early ADP for 2023, and we're going to particularly look at the way too early FFWC draft that we did, best ball draft that the three of us actually participated in. What has it been now, Theo? Like 2 weeks already? Man, the time's flying.
Yeah, it's close to it. It was a really high-level draft. Shout out to Billy Muzio, our friend, and Jody Smith. And shout out to Scott Atkins in the FFWC for putting together a really competitive group of drafters. It was Josh, me, you, Billy, Jody, Stephanie Smalls, Luke Sawhook. We also had Jack Colsheen, who's one of the better FFWC players. We also had a few other players who've been highly successful in the FFWC. And I know I'm forgetting a couple. But it's always difficult, these drafts, especially the early ones. We did the hard way together, JD, and this is sort of like the FFWC version of it. And it has a cool prize. The winner gets to go eat anywhere they want in like their hometown. So I'm sure Josh has like some incredible burrito spot. I'm not sure. And we were trying to go over like, Josh's appearances. But yeah, we really appreciate your time. Every time you're in the district, we get a great deal of information out, and it's awesome being able to like talk out this early ADP and set it. How did you like your team in this draft, Josh? And how do you approach early drafts?
Well, first, thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure. And I will say that Scott Atkins is definitely rooting for me to win because turns out a burrito dinner is a little less expensive than a steak dinner. So I know who he wants to pay out for this one. I think in terms of my team, I'll just rifle through it quickly. It's McCaffrey, Etienne, Olave, Christian Kirk, Judy, Pitts, Jameson Williams, Deshaun Watson, Elijah Moore, Dalton Schultz. Those are the first 10 picks, just to give people an idea of how that draft started. Looking back, I wish I took one more receiver early, but I think that the team still has a pretty obvious path to like what needs to go right for it to happen. But the receiver was definitely thinner than I expected just as we went through it. I think part of it as well is I am now starting my rookie research. So going into this draft 2 weeks ago when I hadn't started any rookie research really, I think that's a disadvantage from the receiver perspective just because we know how important it is to hit on some of these rookie receivers. So me kind of having my hands tied and not feeling confident in who I'm selecting there, it really narrowed my options. So I kind of noticed – it was probably after the JMO pick in round 7. I really saw how receiver thinned out after that and thought, I kind of wish I had one more receiver at this point.
And just to refresh everyone on this format, this particular best ball draft has a slightly different format than some of the other FFWC best ball drafts. Usually FFWC, you're starting 3 wide receivers and you're starting 2 flexes. When you play in a competitive FFWC league, it's as wide receiver heavy as any high stakes format, certainly more so than FFPC, and even more wide receiver centric than the NFFC, because you really want to start those 5 wide receivers. For this one, they chopped off 1 flex, but Josh is right. I mean, it really dries up. It's difficult to kind of make up for it at wideout. But I didn't mind it because I played in this format a little bit before, and I knew it. So I always like having a little leg up on that. But you took Christian McCaffrey. JD, you took Jamar Chase, which is like, anybody listening to the district, JD, Dan, and I are taking Jefferson and Chase 1-2. Andrew 100% is taking those guys 1-2. But you took McCaffrey at 3. For you, would you push him up into the 1-2 discussion, or for you is he the clear 3? What's your approach to McCaffrey in these early drafts?
I kind of think you could argue any version of those 3. I think that is the clear top 3. I think I'd probably lean Jefferson over Chase very, very slightly, but I could also be talked into Chase having more upside in any given year than Justin Jefferson. With the reason I took McCaffrey at 3 was ultimately that I view these 3 as kind of that initial tier 1, and McCaffrey can break fantasy. We've seen him do it. Basically, anytime he's healthy, he is the runaway best running back in fantasy. And I loved what I saw from him in San Francisco. And now having the entire offseason to further incorporate him, the chance for some potentially better quarterback play as well overall is out there, whether it's a free agent, whether it's Purdy's development, whether it's Trey Lance putting it all together. I think there's potential for that as well. So I just felt like he, if healthy, is in the 101 conversation. So that's kind of why I went him there.
And JD, follow up, because JD and I were actually having this conversation in the pre-show, because we're in best ball drafts currently. I'm in 2 FFPC ones right now, and actually I took McCaffrey at the 104 in one of them, and I saw Christian McCaffrey fall to the 105. JD,
well, even the hard way that we did, Theo, I started exactly like Josh did from the 4 spot with McCaffrey and then Etienne coming back. So I got him at 104, and obviously Kelsey went before him in tight end premium.
Mm-hmm. So JD, do you think that that's correct though? Like if you're taking FFPC, is the Kelsey versus McCaffrey, or Kelsey versus really anyone discussion at this point for FFPC? Do you think Kelsey is the clear 103 with the 1.5 points per reception for a tight end, or would you have taken McCaffrey at the 3? And I'm curious Josh's take on how he'd value him in a tight end premium format.
Yeah, I mean, we do so many of these, it starts becoming percentage, right? How much percentage you want to add each guy at every spot. I think when it's tight end premium, we saw again Kelsey, I believe, Fantasy Mojo, shout out to him, he's in this draft, tweeted out the winning lineup, and again we saw Kelsey, right? So it's kind of hard to not want Kelsey in tight end premium, but similar to Josh, I like the top 3 in this draft, CMC, and I'll sprinkle in some Kelsey here and there. I think CMC, the thing with, you look at these RBs, and we'll see it as we get through the draft, it's hard to see these guys have that locked in, possible RB1 role with this kind of production. It's the same thing at tight end, at the tight end position, and that's why you see Kelsey and CMC, and then kind of a drop into the next tier.
Yeah, to me, it's like they're the same tier, and I'd rather pick 1-2 than 3-4 at this point. Yeah. John, how would you go, like, if you're in a tight end premium, Kelsey versus McCaffrey?
I think I'd probably take more Kelsey, but if you gave me the 103 and FFPC 50 times, I would have McCaffrey sprinkled in there. It would probably be 35 Kelsey, 15 McCaffrey if I had 53 spots in that format. That'd be my gut feel there, where Kelsey, ultimately, he's the difference maker. I think we kind of saw that the age cliff isn't close, and a lot of his numbers improved this year compared to last year without Tyreek, which I think we mostly expected, but there was still like a little bit of that uncertainty, like, oh, he's in his 30s. Can they just purely funnel an offense through him where there's almost nothing of danger to the defense on the outside at any time? And I think the answer was kind of a resounding yes, that the Chiefs can still do that, that Kelce can still be that guy. He's about as safe as it comes in terms of the production, the pretty clean bill of health his past like 8 seasons. So I think in FFPC, Kelce looks like a pretty good 103. In this format where it's just PPR, no tight end premium, then I think it would be more of like McCaffrey almost every time out of those 50. And that you could sprinkle in a little Kelce, but I just think the difference that McCaffrey makes at running back and with raw points in this format is something Kelce just can't compete with, where the raw fantasy points are just going to be so much better for McCaffrey.
Shout out to Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon. You may want to cover that Kelce guy a little bit better if you play again next season. I think we all would not mind a Kansas City Philadelphia opening night game. That would be kind of fire. But wanted to get back to this draft. Were there any surprises? This question for everyone. Were there any surprises in the first round, guys? Good or bad? Starting with Josh.
So I had one surprise. I think so Cooper Kupp went at 6. I think that's too early. And the reason for that is a fewfold. One, I don't see how his ADP rises above that. And the reason that I think his ADP will either stay or fall is we have no idea what's going on with Stafford. He could retire. This Rams roster is truly horrific on paper. They're in for a long several year rebuild of some kind. It's an aging, expensive roster. Kupp himself is about to hit 30. He's getting close. He's coming off of a major injury. And I just think that if we take out Stafford in a vacuum, Kupp is not as good of a talent as Jefferson, Chase, Hill, Diggs. Like you could go down the line. And I think like if I'm looking right now, like Lamb, AJ Brown, Adams, Metcalf, like Garrett Wilson, Waddle, Amon-Ra, there's so many guys where I'm kind of like, this might be a better receiver in a vacuum than Kupp. And that's why I think in general, he should be more of a 1-2 pick at this point. 6, I think, is just a little bit aggressive right now in terms of, I don't see him rising, but I have so many reasons why he could fall.
JD, anything you stand out to you in that first round?
Well, it's funny. You and I had this exact conversation coming on the air just because that surprised me. I'm surprised how people are not more or not less bullish on Kupp just because, coming off the injury, his age. And you look at these guys that Josh just mentioned. I mean, we talk about wide receivers that have done it before, that have been in those top 12s. I think he goes at the end of those guys at this point for me. And then I'm kind of looking at the next guys that have that possible upside. But I am surprised by how bullish people are on Kupp just in general right now in best ball land. And the other, I guess, not as surprising, maybe more of a second round discussion, but we're heading that way anyways, Theo, is Barkley. I mean, Barkley was one of the top 3 running backs taken going into the season. He still gave you an RB5 outcome as his first full fully healthy season in a Giants offense that showed you potential, right? And that, they add some pass catchers there and you could see this offense improving even more. And that just helps Barkley. So I do think that he might sneak in at the back end of the first, depending on how watered down some of the backfields get in other offenses. But those are probably the 2 biggest surprises for me in the first round, if we have to point any out. So
for me, I think that basically for this format, I would have been a little more wide receiver centric. Jonathan Taylor is very appealing, but he did go down in points per game. He dropped like 9 points per game this year. And we do have questions about the Colts offense. The 33rd team, which Josh, helped put together, they're projecting Will Levis to be the number 3 overall pick. So there might be a rookie QB for the Colts this season. I just have questions about that. I think if you want to go running back there, pushing Bijan up might have made a little sense. And I think that, JD brings up like Saquon versus Jonathan Taylor is a real discussion right now. But the first round was really not anything too crazy. Pivoting to the second round here, JD, you mentioned Saquon. I picked Garrett Wilson, who I just cannot stop picking around like wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12. I am so bullish on him to my own detriment in these early best ball drafts, where I think that there's a chance that I know they'll have improved quarterback play as long as they change quarterbacks. Even if it's, if it's Jimmy Garoppolo, like there's some rumors, obviously Aaron Rodgers, any kind of stable veteran presence at quarterback, I feel like he could blow up. He had 148 targets as a rookie, which is just incredible. And I feel like checks all the boxes to have like a top 5 wide receiver season and kind of be a guy that could really beat ADP. Curious how you are approaching Garrett Wilson, Josh, in these early drafts.
So this was the first draft I did. I had him queued up for my second round pick. Had no idea if he'd make it there. I think him going in the mid-second feels right. The way I see it is that we suffered through 9 games of Zach Wilson this past year. And if you look at the games where Zach Wilson didn't start, then what are we doing? We're looking at Joe Flacco and Mike White. And he was basically a wide receiver 1, like a mid-tier wide receiver 1 with Flacco and Mike White. These are not good quarterbacks. And I think that kind of shows what the potential is for Wilson. If as a rookie, he was a wide receiver 1 with mediocre QB play, he sucked with Zach Wilson. That's okay. Everyone was awful with Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson may never start another NFL game outside of coming in for injury for the rest of his career, for all we know. I think that ship has sailed for him in New York at the very least. So that's what I like about Garrett Wilson, is that with even moderately competent QB play, he was an elite fantasy producer as a rookie.
And JD, you took T. Higgins, and I know you're extremely bullish on him. Was your pick there with Higgins like structural because you took Chase, or was it Higgins all along for you in that position?
No, I think he's in that range. I think he's going to be in that 2-3 turn range. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of dreaming to hit Burrow on the way back. I figured he probably wouldn't with this crew, but I figure I'll take a chance there. Metcalf, Pittman, and we're going to see, including the guys you just talked about, the common thread is just the question mark at quarterback in a lot of these scenarios. And that's where you're going to see some of these guys, move around and then establish themselves in this ADP as we get more information on the quarterback position. Like I look at Metcalf and Pittman. I prefer Higgins to Pittman. That's for sure. Metcalf looked good at the end of the season, but I still prefer Higgins to Metcalf. And then you're kind of going down the line, and we'll talk about the next guys. But I think he's in that spot, and I don't mind getting Chase with Higgins. I know Josh, the Stack King, who came out with that great piece a few years or a couple years ago. I don't even know it's a couple or a few now, Josh, because it's been so long. But is there a negative, or is there a capped ceiling there with my roster going Chase and Higgins, or is the stack positive with this build?
It looks good to me. I think Higgins should go around that range in general. And we so often see 2 receivers have elite fantasy seasons from the same offense. Chase Higgins, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith. We had a year with Jefferson Thielen recently. Even like Evans Godwin had a lot of really good games together this year. Waddle, Hill, Metcalf, Lockett this year, both crushed. Yep. There's just so many scenarios where you see 2 guys just demolish ADP or just put up big raw fantasy points from the same offense. So all you're asking for is Burrow to throw for 4,540. And this is, you have a good chance of reaching or exceeding ADP with that duo.
Yeah. And JD mentioned Josh's work. Josh dropped a correlation and stacking article on Player Profiler, which is one of the best, which is when he was there maybe 2 years ago at this point. But that article was as good on stacking with real hard data behind it as you will find. So give that an old Google when you're best ball drafting. Anybody listening into this?
Yeah, if you play best ball, it's a must. It's a must.
We've also talked about it in the GOAT District with you, where we had a whole podcast a couple of years back where we really dove into the data. And Josh is excellent with that. Curious, Josh, you took Travis Etienne with your second round selection. Was this a structural pick to have running back, or do you view Etienne as like a great value right there as a back end second rounder, maybe as opposed to taking one of the close to it wide receiver ones?
So for me, I just felt like Higgins, Metcalf, Pittman, Olave, who ended up taking. All those guys felt like a little bit of a teardrop at receiver, as if I would be going down a tier to receiver. ETN kind of felt like the end of that elite running back tier. So I almost didn't take him because I already started with McCaffrey. But I was kind of thinking that there's just such a big drop off in terms of ETN is the workhorse for what should be one of the best offenses in the NFL next season. And he got there in fantasy for the most part this year without catching passes. And we all know that he has that in his range of outcomes. If he doubled or tripled his receiving usage from this past season next year, that wouldn't be the craziest thing. So I kind of felt like he had this really good floor just in terms of what the workload's going to be with rushing. We know he has something in the receiving game. We have also seen him have elite receiving numbers in college with this quarterback in Lawrence. So I kind of think he should be going in this range just to begin with. But then especially when looking at who the next running backs were, I feel like they all had warts where like Breece Hall goes next. He's got the injury. DeAndre Swift just doesn't get playing time like we'd like. Nick Chubb is aging and doesn't catch passes. Josh Jacobs, we have no idea what's going on with him. He has just this massive range of outcomes. And then like Ramondre Stevenson, who knows what's happening year after year with these Patriots running backs. Najee Harris doesn't have the ceiling. So it just kind of felt like I couldn't really pick holes with ETN. I could with the other running backs. So I think looking back on it, I probably would have gone Higgins, Metcalf, or Olave, seeing how the draft played out. But I think in a vacuum, the ETN pick was right, if that makes sense.
100%. And JD went ETN in the second round of the hard way with the McCaffrey ETN start. I'll say that I've heard a lot of arguments recently about how ETN needs more targets in order to justify his current ADP. And I think there's something to be said with that. But if you looking at ETN's raw stats doesn't really give you credit as to how impactful he was this season, because we had the very, very slow start with James Robinson getting the bulk of the work early. Then we had that incredible lull for about a 3-game stretch where ETN was just abysmal. So even if his target share doesn't really go nuts next year, I think that offense is trending up. The Ridley addition is going to help them. I fully expect them to bring back Evan Ingram. We are very bullish on Trevor Lawrence in the GOAT district for next season. So I think there's just a scenario where ETN has his same, rushing share that he saw for the majority of the last 12 games of the season. And the pie grows larger with the Jacksonville offense. So I like that pick. Certainly less things to worry about than like with Breece Hall's injury and whatever. But JD, you did take Breece Hall in the third round. I think that's a good value where you took him. Maybe share a little bit of your thoughts about him.
Yeah, I think, again, it's these guys like Josh mentioned, you start looking and everybody's got a wart, right? Everybody's got like in the right light, they look good, but then you look at them on a different angle. It's not as pretty. So Hall showed us some serious top 5 potential. He's a top 5 running back in this league when he's healthy. So at this point, you have to start filling in the blanks with what's the draft story. You guys hear me always talk about the story I'm telling with my draft. So in this case, I like Breece Hall as an RB1, and then I came back and backed that up with Pollard. I know, again, Pollard with the injury, but for me in the 4th round, when you're looking again at the guys going around him, Pollard for me can easily give you a top 5 finish to the season. So to get those two guys to pair with Chase and Higgins in a league with the 3 receivers, I started with my 2 strong receivers, and now to have those 2 as my starting running backs after 4 rounds, I don't hate it, even with the risk that's implied with both the Jets running back and the Dallas running back.
We see an interesting 2 things start to happen in this range of the draft, and this has kind of been consistent in best ball drafts early. Olave seems to be like the tier break, and it's not necessarily Pittman up there, but in this one Pittman is wide receiver 15 or 16. I'm having trouble reading.
16.
All right. So we're really seeing like Olave, and then there's a gap. So it goes like Olave, and then usually there's a slight gap down to wide receivers. It's just kind of interesting. Do you see Olave as like Josh? You took him in this draft with the 303. did you see Olave as like the last of the like a sizable gap with the players behind him due to his explosive rookie season and his potential in year 2, or do you think he's a little closer to the guys behind him?
I think he's closer to the guys that I took him with. I think you could actually argue that DJ Moore should have gone earlier, where there's no target competition. They don't have CMC catching passes. There's no wide receiver 2 of note on this current roster, but we know that it's a desperate, it's just desperate management. We could see them make a swing for one of these marquee quarterbacks. I think there's a lot of outlets for DJ Moore, so I actually think he should probably go a little earlier. I would definitely take Olave over Pittman. I think it's really tough to sell me on Pittman over Olave when they both have QB issues, and one guy was simply a better prospect and has shown much more per like stage of his career when you look at Olave's rookie season compared to Pittman. So I don't see any way where Pittman should go ahead of him. I think Olave, Higgins, Metcalf, that kind of feels like a good group. So I think he looks like a round 2-3 turn pick.
Pittman
feels
at least where Pittman feels like a purgatory player where he could hit wide receiver 2 numbers and not really do anything for your team. JD, I know you're high on Olave. Do you view him like kind of in his own little tier? We talked about this with Davis Maddock when he was on with Billy Muzio in the district. He's very high on Olave as well. Views him kind of like Jalen Waddle last year in terms of value. Do you view him in kind of his own little stratosphere, JD, or is there anybody right behind him that you see that is close to him?
Yeah, for me, what Olave's shown you, it's not like he's been in the ideal quarterback situation either, right? Or in that offense, just overall. So he's shown us that production in an iffy situation. Whereas Pittman, you saw, you had iffy weeks in an iffy offense. And I think like Pittman for me now is probably closer to like it's hard, man. I'm looking at where he would go. He's probably in the next round for me, closer to the Mike Williams, I want to say, ahead of Mike Williams.
Yeah.
In that range, right? Just because, again, unless something really great happens at the quarterback position, Indy, as much as I'm a Colts fan, it's looking gloom at the moment. And then even when they come in with a rookie quarterback, we've all seen it. It takes time, right, to build that rapport with these guys, especially with a younger receiver. It'll be in a new offense for the quarterback. So for me, Olave is definitely in this range. You talked about DJ Moore, Josh. It's funny because I'm looking at the FFPC, the Never Too Early, the latest complete draft, and DJ Moore went right ahead of Olave in the 4th round.
Yeah, I think that there's a similar bet right now. Pittman, it's interesting. Like Pittman had multiple games where Paris Campbell outperformed him, where Alec Pierce outperformed him a few times. So to me, it's like the Pittman window is now to kind of, he's not a guy that's going to hurt you, but I don't think I think he's a guy that kind of doesn't really elevate you, whether it's dynasty or.
Well, if you want to take a crack at a Colts receiver, you take one of the guys you mentioned, Theo, later in the draft, right?
Yeah, Alec Pierce late versus Pittman here, those guys might be, 12 spots apart in terms of like scoring this year in PPR. So it's interesting. One trend we also see, guys, is we start seeing quarterbacks go off the board. And it's almost automatic at this point in best ball. When you see Patrick Mahomes get selected, you see Hurts or Allen go right behind him, and then you see the other quarterbacks kind of getting, pushed up because of this. FFWC is a 4-point passing touchdown format, and again, we have 24 rounds here for this best ball with no kickers and no defense. So, what do we think of this? I mean, we've talked about it in the GOAT District for months now. The 1, 2, 3 in like the 3rd round here. Do you think this is correct? Do you think this is not even high enough? Josh, your take on the return to early QB?
I think it wasn't high enough. So on underdog, half PPR, so a little bit of an advantage to quarterbacks if the other positions don't score as much. But Allen, Hurts, and Mahomes are all gone by pick 15.
Yep.
Here we see them all going in the 3rd round. I think the 2-3 turn is probably where these guys should be going, give or take. So I think getting them kind of in the middle of the 3rd felt pretty good. If I had taken a receiver at 2, I would have considered going. Hurts would have been my pick. He's my current QB1 for this next season. He was the points per game leader in fantasy this past year. if I had taken Higgins maybe in the second round, I probably still would have gone Olave at 3-3, but I would have been open to Hurts in the third. I just didn't feel like you can start with no receivers through 3 rounds when it's start 3. But I did think, like, I at least considered Hurts, even though it wouldn't have worked with my build, just because it felt like good value.
Yeah, the guy who took Hurts is pretty sharp in this draft. Good after watching that Super Bowl. But I do think what's interesting is I agree with you, and we've had JD and I have got a chance to sit down with some of the best players in the country in high stakes, and the return to, we'll call it early rounds, almost first round QB drafting is right there. I think we'll really see it in the NFFC where it's 6-point passing touchdowns. Like, I think that it's not going to be out of the question to see a quarterback go with the 1-2 turn with that third round reversal format. But I am curious, JD, we saw this in 2 drafts now where QB4 gets pushed up because of it's like a gravitational pull where you see the top 3 go. We saw this in our FFPC hardway draft where quarterbacks flew off the board after the big 3. In this particular draft, Lamar Jackson went QB4, which I think is a little bit abnormal. It's usually Burrow going QB4. And then Jackson is somewhat closer to the Lawrence's, Fields, and Herbert's right now with his question marks. Do you think that that is a mistake people are making, or are you trying to grab the potential QB1 there, JD?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say it's a mistake, right? At this time of the year, I think what we will see, and you talked about Lamar going ahead of Burrow in a draft, and you've got Herbert kind of right behind that. We're going to see some of these kind of next tier quarterbacks as they get the new rookie, hot rookie receiver, or they get like a big signing at receiver or at a weapon around them. You're going to see probably some of these guys jump up. We saw last year, like Russell Wilson flew up, right? After he went to Denver.
Trey Lance and Russell Wilson. It's like those guys got pushed up, and QB, if you took the lower QB1 and the high QB2 this year, you were dead in the water. Those guys all failed to a T. Trey Lance, Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, they all failed. You only saw value with Justin Fields and Tua Tagovailoa, where those guys were late, like end of
Trevor Lawrence.
Trevor Lawrence, 100%, and then a couple of these guys undrafted. But Josh, do you think we should be treating it like tight end, where the truly elite and then wait, or you want to take shots on like this next tier?
Yeah, I actually was talking about this earlier with our head of betting, Ryan Reynolds. He and I are working on a lot of underdog content to come out this week, some other best ball platforms as well. And we both kind of talked about how after this top 3, you should probably wait. And that was kind of our consensus, was that if you wait a little bit, Lawrence, Herbert, Watson, I think Rodgers is interesting because of where he could go. Geno Smith even, I think, is pretty interesting. It seems like a lot of those guys don't look too different, to me at least, than I think Burrow was too soon. I would probably at this stage have Lamar at QB4 because he does have the upside to outscore Hurts, Allen, and Mahomes. We've seen him do it before. But it almost feels like Burrow's kind of a safe pick to go quite that early. And I don't think on paper Herbert and Burrow are going to project that differently when it's week 1 of the 2023 season. I think Burrow's obviously a little more stable, but I don't think I'd be very surprised if Herbert outscored him. And I think Herbert has more upside even than Burrow. So while I take Burrow ahead of him, I think those guys are pretty close. I'd almost rather Fields even, where if he gets a receiver, he can even sneak into that tier. So I kind of view Burrow, Lawrence, Herbert as these guys should all even Watson, they should go a lot closer together than they did in this draft.
We see the wide receivers just fly off the board in the 4th round, this is very normal for a FFWC draft. We see 8 go in the 4th round. We see 7 go in the 5th round. And that's just how it's going to be if you draft FFWC. Sometimes you see even more. The yellow runs are insane. But before we dive into these guys, one big mistake, I've discussed this with Dan a little bit, and a couple of other guys we're in chats with that play high stakes. It seems like the Calvin Ridley is so close to Christian Kirk. I've been in multiple drafts where Calvin Ridley goes ahead of Christian Kirk, which seems kind of nuts to me. What is your reaction to Ridley versus Kirk, Josh? Am I wrong here? Like, I think that it should be Kirk, even more of a gap between him and Ridley right now.
Yeah, I liked picking Kirk at 410. I didn't think this was some smash pick, but I thought about him and Ridley. I looked at some of the other options, and Kirk just felt like a really safe option with upside, where year one playing with Trevor Lawrence, he was a borderline wide receiver 1. And I think we can expect more from him next year. I feel like people are very scared, like, oh, Calvin Ridley's there. I'm like, well, Ridley's almost 30. He hasn't played in a year. Kirk is the one that has experience with Lawrence, and in their first season together, he just smashed. It seems like Lawrence kind of likes Kirk and vice versa. Kirk was an elite prospect, in my opinion, who kind of floundered and underperformed with the Cardinals. So seeing what he did last year felt more in line with, honestly, what I expected his career to do playing out wise. On Underdog, actually, Ridley goes ahead of him. I was looking this morning doing some research. I think there should be at least a 1-round gap in Kirk's favor, where Kirk has done it. I understand that Ridley had some very elite usage in terms of the target share with the air yards with the Falcons. That was also a team that aired it out and really didn't have much else, where it was basically him and Julio Jones. And whenever Julio Jones was injured, then you were dropping basically to like Olamide Zaccheaus. So we haven't necessarily seen Ridley with too much target competition. Meanwhile, Kirk, Zay Jones, Engram, that is there's real competition there for targets. So I would just go with Kirk, the guy that's done it at an elite level already with this quarterback. And I think Ridley's kind of the upside swing. I would just wait longer. So looking at it, like, I took Judy right before Ridley. I think Judy is going to project better than Ridley. I think his upside is more than Ridley. Moving down the list, like Theo, you took Watson. I loved that pick. You basically just need Rodgers to stay in Green Bay. I have no idea what the odds of that happening are, but if we knew Rodgers was his quarterback, like, I think you'd want Watson well ahead of Ridley. So it seems like Ridley should be closer to like a 5-6 turn pick, maybe mid-round 6 at this stage, where we just don't fully know what's going on with him, and where we just don't see this happen very often, where a receiver takes a full year off. I hope he's training, but like, usually when these guys are away from the team, it's just harder for them to be motivated to train quite as hard. And he's also older with an injury history, and he's always just kind of been older for his place in the NFL in terms of seasons played compared to age. He's kind of like Kenny Golladay, where you look at how many years he's played, you look at his age, and you go, oh, wow, this guy, yeah, I forgot he started his NFL career at like 23 and a half, 24 years old.
Yeah, and like Kirk, you bring up this past season where, you know, he was like wide receiver 15-ish, but the year before he was wide receiver 24. You know, so we've seen this now for 2 seasons with Kirk producing for us. So I don't know, it's very odd. You bring up JD,
sorry, Theo. I think it's important, guys, to mention too, when we did this draft, there was no like set ADP, right? We were like searching for a lot of these guys, right? Like through the name list. We didn't have a proper ADP in order because it's one of the first drafts on the site. So again, I'm looking at some of the guys that went after Ridley. I mean, give me Jameson Williams like 2 rounds later. You know what I mean? In Detroit, that showed us those nice flashes. To me, if I'm going to take like a shot at upside, I'd rather go for the young receiver coming off of an injury, but still showing us flashes in an uptrending offense. Whereas Ridley for me right now is more of a hope and a dream. And I think people forget how old this guy is, you know, and is he not the new Flash? Like he had that one season or whatever, and now we're always going to be chasing that in the drafts? Or do you guys actually think that he comes in and solidifies? I don't think that the answer to that quantifies him being a 5th round draft pick, in my opinion, but again, could have been just searching for names.
I think he's
a good one. Jamo was my favorite pick that I took in the 7th round. I assumed he was off the board because, like you said, we were just like frantically searching the whole time for players. We're just like Googling stuff. Like, I was looking for anything, but yeah, when I took Jamo at 703, I thought that was really good value. And I think what you said about Ridley's a good way to put it, because I was struggling to figure out what type of archetype I would classify for him. I just felt like round 7 was too late. That's a good one. JMO versus Ridley. It's like, all right, let's just go with the guy that has, he's like, what, 6-7 years younger with the elite speed. So I think that's a good way to put it. So yeah, I think I would go JMO over Ridley in a vacuum. Like I would take Ridley over like Gabe Davis, Bateman, Burks, a lot of the guys that were going like in the round after him. But I think that's a good one in terms of if you're going to take the upside swing, I would say probably every single platform, Ridley's ADP is going to be ahead of JMO. If you want that, you can just wait a round or two.
Sticking with this 7th round, we saw 4 running backs go off the board. JD, you selected J.K. Dobbins. The pick before that was Miles Sanders. James Conner went to Jody Smith, and then I selected Javonte Williams. Josh, do any of these round 7 running backs appeal to you in this range?
Yes. So I was looking at Dobbins, and then JD took him. I liked that one. It's pretty crazy that his ADP is so much later than last year when he's now like he should be healthier. I think there's kind of this Lamar Jackson uncertainty, but I think Dobbins is good enough where even if Lamar's not there, he can still produce quite good numbers. And if anything, Lamar not being there would hurt his rush efficiency, but probably helps him in the passing game. So I'm not fully sure if purely for fantasy, Lamar's helping or hurting Dobbins. And then the other one was Javonte. I loved that pick. I think Javonte should go like looking at Connor versus Javonte in a vacuum. One of these guys is currently on, like, if you look at, I'm writing up a Super Bowl article for 2024 Super Bowl bets that I've made. And one thing I talk about is
That's sick,
how
That's so awesome.
is I talk about why I'm bullish on the Broncos. And if you just look at odds, on DraftKings, the Cardinals have the worst Super Bowl odds for next year because they literally don't have a quarterback. They have a terrible aging roster. I would not want the aging bell cow from this aging, terrible roster that's currently projecting to have the worst chance of making the Super Bowl over Javonte Williams, where he got injured early enough that his recovery should set him up for week 1. And where I think overall this Broncos offense should be better. So I think Dobbins, Javonte, I would probably take both those guys over, even like Damian Pierce, who went 6-1. I think that's kind of where I'd lean right now, even just in terms of where we should anchor it, that both those guys, you should push them up quite a bit.
JD, anything to add on your selection of J.K. Dobbins? And I will say that I thought you were going to take Javonte Williams, JD, and I would end up with Dobbins there.
Yeah, the total build choice. Those were the two I was deciding from. I couldn't believe Javonte Williams was there. I look right now at the never too early on the FFPC. He's going in the 4th round. Javonte just around Pollard. So that's serious value there. But again, we're searching for these names, right? And because I already had Hall coming off injury, Pollard coming off injury, I was like, I don't want another guy. He's a little less coming off injury with Dobbins. We've seen him put up numbers and volume. And like Josh said, even if Lamar's not there, maybe the volume that he gets, especially with targets, kind of keeps him at that level. So I did like Dobbins there. I was deciding between Williams. So the fact that you got him like in the mid 7th round is just pure money.
Yeah, I think they're both guys that will be dead zone running backs this year. And I think that they both have potential to beat their ADPs there because they're both young. We've seen them both flash. There's definitely some risk in both of them, but that's why they're in the dead zone. And if those guys would have stayed healthy this season, I think they would have been going higher than this, certainly. Wanted you guys to pivot over to wide receiver. I love the Jameson Williams selection Josh made. JD's a big fan. We love Jameson Williams in the GOAT district, so we don't need to dive into him.
Even Alfredo Brown earlier. Go check out earlier. Dan and Theo sat down with Alfredo Brown from the Football Guys, big Jameson Williams guy.
Yeah, he loves Jameson Williams. He actually traded the 104 in a non-Superflex PPR league for Jameson Williams in the 201. He talked about that trade. It's a very
I love that. Wow.
That's a great trade.
Big time. So we love Williams, but let's look at starting with George Pickens at the 7-4, all the way down to Zay Jones with the 8-12. We saw like about 11 wide receivers go in this range. So is there any of these guys that really stand out to you as values here, Josh?
Yeah, I'll go rapid fire. I have a few strong thoughts on these guys. I think Pickens at 7-4 is way too early. This guy had a 15% target share as a rookie. He's basically being inflated by a couple of really good catches. Kenny Pickett is in no way an elite quarterback for our fantasy receivers. Deontay Johnson is still there, and out-targeted him pretty significantly. Just gets open at a better rate as well. If we keep going, Sutton looked like an afterthought once Judy got going. That's why I was so excited to take Judy at 503, is I kind of felt like we just saw it happen this year. We really didn't know who it was going to be. It looked like Sutton early on, and then it was pretty clear by the end of the season, no. Jerry Jeudy is the clear best receiver in this offense by quite a bit. And outside of that one elite season that Sutton had, where there was really no target competition, and at this point, it's 3.5 years ago, he feels like someone that he's going to be like a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. I don't see the upside. I think the range of outcomes is narrow. I loved the Dotson pick. I don't know what the difference is between McLaurin at 509 and Dotson at 709 was kind of how I thought about it. So kind of funny that Billy got both. I almost feel like they should go a lot closer together, and that he took McLaurin a little early, and then Dotson kind of fell and was gifted to him. I don't have nuanced thoughts on the rookies yet in terms of knowing where they should go, but I do love Quentin Johnston. I have watched some of his film. I have dug into his statistical profile.
You had a CeeDee Lamb comp.
Yeah, people were pooping on that. And then a lot of people commented and they said, I looked at the film and I see why you said faster CeeDee Lamb. The type of raw athleticism and the way that he gracefully contorts his body gave me CeeDee Lamb. And then I like how CeeDee Lamb doesn't really impress you after the catch with any of his moves, but he always just gets a ton of yards. And it's almost like you don't expect him to be as shifty as he is, and that you don't really see any elite speed or elite traits out of Lamb after the catch, but he's consistently getting there. Whereas with Quentin Johnston, I was like, oh, this guy's bigger and faster than Lamb, which I really liked in terms of what his potential is. If you're going to give me a guy that had really good target shares from year 2 onward with the frame, with the speed, and he's probably going in the first half of round 1, I think he's probably going to go in round 5 by the end of this summer. So I really liked that one. And then I thought Juju at 803 was just the reach of the century personally. He looked god-awful this year. He looked god-awful last year and the year before. I don't know where he's going to be, but he didn't look worth his contract when it was a 1-year, $3 million deal with the Chiefs. And he's probably not going to be there next year. If he couldn't produce with Patrick Mahomes and no target competition in the receiver room, kind of like, what do you expect from there? And then I liked Theo, your Tony pick. I'm going to just hemorrhage money once again on Kadarius Toney this season.
If you're not,
the guy is way too brittle, but like per route, he is a top 10 receiver in the NFL per route when healthy. I think that counts for something.
Not a bad punt return last night either for Mr. Toney, setting the Super Bowl record. You love to see it. What a smart organization the Chiefs are when they traded a 3rd-round pick to get him. People mentioned that it might be for special teams, and he helped them win the Super Bowl. I mean, that they're as sharp as it gets. For me, I agree with you. I love the Dotson pick. Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston most likely will rise up just based on draft capital in this format. I think they're both values based on the fact that you're getting them here, and they're both going to be in first-round NFL picks, most likely. I like those picks. I don't mind Jacoby Myers. I think he's going to get paid a lot. I thought that was a sharp pick. But yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think Dotson really stands out. It's like people just forget about all the touchdowns scored and how good he looked, and how well he closed the season, which we like to look at. JD, who are the wide receivers here that stand out for you?
Yeah, I'm going to triple down on Dotson. I got him in the 8th round of the hard way. I was sad to see him go here. I thought I might get him again in the 8th round coming back. But of course, with, you sharps kind of blocking, sniping along the way. But I'm going to bring attention to 2, actually, Theo, round 6 receivers that we didn't talk about at all, which I thought were amazing value. Talking about Muzio, he got Marquise Brown in the 6th round, and then Tyler Lockett went right before or after. What is that, 8th or the 6th round? So before Marquise. So I like those 2 picks, actually, especially we're talking about these guys in the 7th. If you can lock up the volume that those guys are getting in their offenses the round right prior, I think that's some serious value.
Yeah, we talked about him with Alfredo Brown. Alfredo is recommending him as a dynasty offseason buy. I got Marquise Brown as wide receiver 36 in a current FFPC draft that I was drafting. Wow. Like,
he's forgotten. He's forgotten.
He opened up the season so well, and they certainly have a lot invested in him. And if they're going to be as bad as Vegas and Josh think that they are, he's certainly going to have some nice game scripts. Wanted to pivot over to running back.
Well,
Really-
one thing on Marquise Brown before we keep going, Hopkins won't be there. There is no way that 31-year-old Hopkins, who's already said he wants out, is going to stay for maybe the NFL's worst team in what's kind of like the final season of his prime at this point. So I think there's almost no chance that he remains in Arizona. So it's really just going to be Marquise Brown sucking up garbage time volume or game after game after game for next year.
Yeah, it's
Theo, you're getting compliments from the chat. Shout out to the chat. You guys have been awesome. Sorry, man. We're just trying to squeeze Josh as much as we can in the 60 we got him. So we've been a little ignoring the chat, but we appreciate you guys big time.
Wanted to quickly pivot over to running back. We see in the 8th round, you start seeing a slight run on running backs. We see Rachaad White, Tyler Algier, David Montgomery, Billy Muzio with a Cam Akers, which, you know, if anybody knows Billy's history, this was a standout pick. Then James Cook, Isaiah Pacheco, Zach Charbonnet, who I love, AJ Dillon. We see this little cluster of running back picks. Do any of these players really stand out to you as value here, Josh? Eight running backs go in about 13 picks.
So I've got a question for you guys. What's the difference between Dameon Pierce and Tyler Algier?
Nothing.
Love that.
That's kind of what I was thinking as I was looking. I was like,
quarterback clarity in Atlanta, and a coach that you know is going to run the ball in Atlanta versus the mystery box of Cliff Kingsbury if he's the OC for the Texans.
Yeah, it just kind of seemed like I don't know who has more job security between Pierce and Algier, but if they're going nearly 3 rounds apart and they're both pretty similar, like by the end of the season, Algier was catching passes. He caught passes in college. It's not like Pierce is necessarily some elite pass catcher either. We were kind of disappointed with his pass game usage, I think, for the most part. It was almost like Pierce was much better in the run game and then just not quite as much in the receiving game. I think the Falcons offense is going to be better than the Texans most likely next year. So I thought that was probably the best pick out of all those running back picks personally, though I also liked Akers. I texted Billy because he and I have been going back and forth on Akers for 2 years now. We've podcasted about him so many times. And I texted him. I said, you know what? I was looking at Akers in the next round. Nice pick there. I know you hate the guy, but he flashed a lot down the stretch. But overall, Algier looked like the best pick for me in that range.
Theo, I don't know if you noticed, but Josh is just pinging off my hardway draft, which I love. I got Algier in the 9th. And I mean, I love looking at guys and how they did at the end of a season. And you look from 15 to 18, he was a top 12 3 of those weeks, and he was top 16 running back in the last week in that iffy Atlanta offense. So again, you think this offense is ascending, they're going to take a step forward. He looked like he can handle volume. I like Algier at this value for sure.
Yeah, and shout out to Billy. It's that's so funny. It's like the old Harvey Dent Batman quote: "You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself a villain." That's Billy. Josh finally broke him down. So there we go. And I like the value there. But also, I like my Dillon pick. I know Dan Williamson is high on him in this range, and Andrew Schellenberg is as well.
Great value. Great value.
I think that Aaron Jones could be a sneaky cut candidate, and I think that his contract situation is up in the air in terms of like what direction they're taking, especially if Rodgers moves on. So I think that Dillon could rise up. That kind of, for those running backs, that kind of does it for me. I wanted to just quickly look at the tight ends. We see a cluster of tight ends go in the 8th round with Waller, Freiermuth, and then we see other tight ends start to go in the 9th, and then we see Schultz and Njoku in the 10th. So it's kind of a 2.5 round cluster of tight ends here. Do any of these guys stand out to you as a value, Josh?
My fire alarm is getting tested right now, so I'll let you guys know. I sent it in the private chat.
No worries at all. You know what? That kind of.
Don't even worry about it. We've done the 60. Yeah, man. Yeah. We appreciate you, Josh. Guys, check out Josh Larky at JLarky Tweets and at the 33rd team. Guys, no brainer. Follow, check out all his material, especially right now when you're smashing best balls. You want to get an edge. He's definitely the guy. Josh, we appreciate your time, man.
Thank you very much.
I love it.
And make sure if you enjoyed today with Josh, make sure you tune in Wednesday night because we have the current Best Ball Mania champion, Pat Carrain of NBC Sports Edge, returning to the GOAT District So we'll go over some of these polarizing ADPs, especially in the underdog streets, and get a chance to sit down with Pat after his huge accomplishment. Last time we had him on, he was a fantastic guest, and now he's got all the receipts to prove it. So we're excited to have him back in the district.
2 million more reasons, right, Theo?
100%, man. The guy could, he's going to run pure the rest of his life with that takedown. That's a hell of a win.
It's the guy's a beauty. It's well deserved. We can't wait to talk to him. We've had a blast with Josh. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. Stick with us all off season, guys. Smash the subscribe, smash the like. We appreciate your support. We'll check you all later.
Go district. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, ball. And I bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Bleed, I ball. Cause I bleed. Hey, bleeding, I ball. Defeated the odds. Didn't see him at all. JD in the pods. I needed it all. I bleeded a lie. You bleeded a lie. Not bleeded a lie. And that's what I go do. Facts, let me show you. Happen to know dudes. Drafting, they don't do bad and they don't lose. Make you wanna bleed. It's the GO District boys giving you the business and no gimmicks. The best ball drafts got me feeling like it's Christmas. Then it's Christmas all of a sudden and these riches came from nothing. And I got this all from loving the district. See, I just drafted, forget it. I laughed at the critics, they mad at the digits. I clap back by listening. See, BALLiN ain't a problem if you kick it with them off. And I refresh the feed till autumn. Then I bleed, go.
Awesome time, fellas. That was really good.
Yeah, that was fun, Josh. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me on. Sorry
Get out of the building. Get out of the